far beyond the reach of any human telescope, in a stretch of space where stars bend like glass and silence carries its own kind of weight, a battle was ending. The interdimensional anomaly had torn through 3 galaxies before Beta Ray Bill caught up to it. It was not a creature. It was not a weapon. It was a wound in reality itself, hungry, patient, and impossibly old. And Bill, the worthy champion forged in the fires of Asgard's judgment, had pursued it across the cosmos because no one else could. He struck the anomaly with everything he had. Stormbreaker sang through the void, lightning curling around its head like a living serpent. The rift screamed, folded inward, and then, in its final breath, pulled him with it. There was no warning, no falling, no sense of motion. Only a long, weightless stillness, as if the universe had paused to consider where to place him next. When awareness returned, Bill was drifting in low orbit above a world he did not recognize. Blue oceans, familiar continents, a planet that looked, at first glance, like every Earth he had ever encountered in his long travels. He hovered there for a moment, letting Stormbreaker's hum settle, letting his senses stretch outward. The atmosphere was calm. The cities below glowed warm against the night side of the planet. Aircraft moved in orderly lines. Satellites whispered with chatter he could almost understand. It looked peaceful. It looked, in every measurable way, like a world that was thriving. And yet something pulled at him. A quiet wrongness. The kind a soldier feels before an ambush, or a father feels before bad news arrives at the door. He descended slowly, careful not to alarm the people below. He listened. That was always his first instinct. Before judgment, before action, he listened. And the more he listened, the stranger this earth became. The voices on the airwaves did not speak of heroes the way other worlds did. They spoke of ratings, of sponsorships, of merchandise. They argued about appearances and scandals and contracts. Children laughed at televised rescues that felt rehearsed. Parents whispered nervously when certain names were mentioned. And one name, above all others, dominated every broadcast, every billboard, every quiet conversation, and every quiet home. Homelander. Bill rolled the name across his tongue. It tasted of marketing. It tasted of fear pretending to be love. On every screen, a man in red, white, and blue smiled with teeth too perfect, eyes too bright, posture too rehearsed. The people cheered for him. But underneath the cheering, Bill heard something else. A held breath. As though the entire planet were applauding with a knife pressed to its back. He drifted lower, past clouds, past the gleam of glass towers, and watched. A stage rescue in one city, the victims clearly actors. A press conference in another, every question pre-approved. A young hero crying quietly in an alley, ashamed of something he had been ordered to do. And above it all, the corporate logo of a company called Vought, stamped onto capes, helicopters, lunchboxes, and morning cereal. Bill had seen tyranny before. He had seen gods fall and demons rise. But this was something subtler, something colder. A world where heroism had been packaged, priced, and sold back to the people who needed it most. His grip on Stormbreaker tightened. Far below, in a glass tower that scraped the clouds, a different kind of attention was turning toward him. Vought's satellites had caught the descent. Their analysts were already scrambling. An unidentified entity, humanoid, wielding an energy signature that registered off every chart they owned. Cosmic, unaffiliated. In a boardroom lit by soft amber light, executives leaned forward. They did not see a warning. They did not see a stranger. They saw an opportunity. A cosmic hero, freshly arrived, with no contract, no handler, no history on this earth. A blank page, a new product, a new face for a new campaign. A new god they could sell to a public growing tired of the old one. Somewhere in that same building, on a private floor sealed behind reinforced glass, Homelander watched the same footage. His smile did not move, but his eyes, pale and unblinking, narrowed by the smallest degree. The skies above this earth had just changed, and neither side, not yet, understood how completely. The first contact did not come with weapons. It came with a smile. A sleek black aircraft, painted with the Vought emblem, rose into the upper atmosphere to meet him. Inside sat a team of handlers, lawyers, and a woman named Ashley who spoke too quickly and apologized too often. Beside her, calmer, sharper, sat Stan Edgar, a man whose silence carried more authority than most men's speeches. They greeted Beta Ray Bill with practiced warmth, offering bottled water, a translator, and a folder thick with contracts. Bill accepted none of it. He hovered beside their craft, Stormbreaker resting against his shoulder, and listened as they spoke of partnership. They told him Earth needed him. They told him the people would love him. They told him that with the right team, the right image, the right management, he could become the most beloved hero this world had ever known. They spoke of merchandise, of a place among something called the Seven. They spoke as though heroism were a career path and they were offering him a promotion. Bill said little. He let them speak until their words ran dry. Then he asked a single question. Who on this earth did they protect when no cameras were watching? The silence that followed was brief, but it was enough. Ashley laughed nervously. Edgar did not. The folder closed. The offer shifted, sweetened, expanded. More money. More influence. A private tower. A global platform. Bill listened to it all with the patience of a mountain listening to wind. When the aircraft finally turned back toward the city, Bill did not follow. He went elsewhere. He went where Vought did not want him to go. He drifted over neighborhoods the cameras avoided. He saw a tenement fire where no hero arrived for 40 minutes because the cameras had not yet been positioned. He saw a young woman dragged into an alley while a caped figure flew overhead, distracted by a live stream. He saw a child clutching a Homelander doll, asking her mother why the real one never came when she called. He saw a rescue stage for a film crew, the building rigged in advance, the victims paid, the danger imaginary. And then, blocks away, a real collapse, real screams, real blood with no hero in sight because the news vans had already left. Each scene settled in him like a stone dropped into still water. He did not rage. He did not strike. He simply remembered. That was always his way. Witness first, judgment later. On Earth, in a control room lined with monitors, analysts tracked his every movement. They noted which districts he visited. They noted how long he lingered. They noted with growing unease that he kept choosing the places they had worked hardest to hide. And then there were the leaks, small at first. A redacted document about something called Compound V, brushing the edges of public conversation. A whisper about experiments on children. A former employee found dead in a hotel room ruled a suicide before the investigation began. Bill did not yet know the full shape of it, but he felt it, the way a healer feels infection beneath unbroken skin. In his private suite, Homelander watched the public reaction to the newcomer with a stillness that unnerved his staff. The polls had shifted overnight. Approval numbers he had spent a decade cultivating were drifting, just slightly, just enough. Trending hashtags carried a new name. Talk show hosts spoke of the cosmic stranger with a reverence they had never quite given him. Children drew pictures of a silver figure with a hammer, and parents posted them online, smiling. Homelander smiled too. He smiled while he crushed a glass tumbler in his hand. He smiled while the blood ran between his fingers and dripped onto the white carpet. He smiled because he had learned long ago that smiling was what people expected. But inside, something older and colder was waking up. Something that did not like being looked away from. Something that had never in its entire manufactured life learned how to share a sky. The meeting was inevitable. Vought arranged it carefully. A rooftop in the heart of the city, lit by golden hour sun, cameras positioned at every angle. Reporters were briefed. Talking points were distributed. The world was told to expect history. A handshake between Earth's greatest hero and the champion from the stars. A partnership for the ages. Beta Ray. Bill arrived first. He did not pose. He did not wave. He stood at the edge of the roof, Stormbreaker grounded beside him, and watched the city breathe. He had agreed to the meeting for one reason only. He wanted to see the man behind the smile. He wanted to look into the eyes of the figure this world called a god and decide for himself what stood inside that suit. Homelander descended a moment later, slowly, deliberately, letting the wind catch his cape just so. The cameras loved it. He landed with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed every gesture 1,000 times in a mirror. His smile was warm. His voice when he spoke was warmer. He welcomed Bill to Earth. He spoke of brotherhood. He spoke of shared duty. He extended a gloved hand, and the world held its breath. Bill did not take it. He looked at Homelander instead. Looked through him, the way a craftsman looks at a flawed blade. The way a priest looks at a man who has memorized prayers but never meant a single one. And in that long, unhurried gaze, Homelander felt something he had not felt in years. He felt seen, not adored, not feared. The cameras kept rolling, but the script began to fall apart. Homelander adjusted smoothly, gracefully, leaning closer, lowering his voice for a private aside that the microphones would still catch. He told Bill, with the gentle menace of a man used to winning, that this world had rules, that heroes here played certain parts, that it would be wise to learn them. Bill answered quietly. He said that he had served gods and seen them fall. He said that he had stood beside warriors who had earned every scar they carried. He said that he knew the difference between a hero and a costume. And he said, without raising his voice, that he had already made his decision about which one stood before him. Homelander's smile did not move, but the muscles around his eyes tightened. The wind shifted. Somewhere far below, a child pointed up at the rooftop and asked her father why the shiny one looked sad. Homelander leaned in further. He spoke of what he could do to this city, to this world. He listed names. He listed numbers. He spoke of the people who loved him and what their love allowed him to do without consequence. It was the speech he used on senators and rivals. It had never failed. Bill listened. When Homelander finished, Bill said only this: that power without honor was not power. It was a sickness wearing a cap, and that the worst part of such a sickness was not what it did to the world. It was what it did to the soul of the man carrying it. For a moment, just a moment, Homelander's face slipped, not into rage, into something far more dangerous, into doubt. A flicker of the boy he had once been, strapped to a table in a laboratory, performing for scientists who never once said his name with love. The flicker passed. The smile returned. He laughed loudly for the cameras and clapped Bill on the shoulder as though they had shared a joke. But as he flew away, the cape catching the light, the crowd cheering below, Homelander felt something burning beneath his ribs. Not jealousy. Jealousy, he understood. This was older. It was inferiority. The quiet, unbearable knowledge that somewhere in the world a being existed who could not be impressed by him, who could not be bought, who could not be flattered, who had looked at him fully and found him wanting. And Homelander, for all his power, did not know how to live in a world that contained such a gaze. After the rooftop, Bill did not return to orbit. He went underground. Not literally, though that came later, but into the places where Vought's polished surfaces gave way to the truth beneath. He moved like a rumor through the city, a flicker of silver in a warehouse district, a presence felt rather than seen in the lower floors of forgotten research facilities. He spoke to nurses who had signed non-disclosure agreements. He spoke to security guards who had buried things they could not forget. He spoke to mothers who had lost children to a program no government would name. And slowly, piece by piece, the shape of it came into focus. Compound VA serum refined over decades injected into infants without consent. Powers manufactured in cradles. Children raised in laboratories, named like products, marketed like franchises. Some became heroes. Some became cautionary tales, quietly disposed of when their abilities proved inconvenient. Bill listened to recordings. He read files smuggled out by trembling hands. He stood in a sealed room where a row of small beds still bore the names of test subjects who had not survived their 5th birthdays. He did not weep. Bill rarely wept. But Stormbreaker in his grip hummed with a low mourning note that those nearest to him said sounded almost like a hymn. The corruption did not end with the children. It ran through every artery of the country. Senators on Vought's payroll. Generals who took private meetings in private jets. Journalists fed approved stories and rewarded with promotions. Police departments using Vought training, Vought equipment, Vought scripts. Crimes committed by heroes were not investigated. They were rebranded. A bystander killed in a careless rescue became a noble sacrifice. A whistleblower silenced became a tragic accident. A protest crushed beneath a hero's boot became a public safety success. And above it all, the smiling face of Homelander, sold on cereal boxes and lunch trays, his image taught in schools, his catchphrases printed on classroom posters. A god built for marketing, sustained by terror, and worshipped by a population too tired and too afraid to ask what lay beneath the cape. Bill understood now. This was not a world without heroes. This was a world where heroism itself had been hollowed out, stuffed with cotton, and propped up in a store window. He began to act, quietly at first. He delivered evidence to the few journalists who had not yet been bought. He protected witnesses through nights that would have otherwise ended in fire. He stood in the doorway of a hospital while masked men with corporate logos on their vests turned around and walked away, because the silver figure in the corridor was not something their training had prepared them for. The leaks grew. Documents reached the public. Names surfaced. A grieving father appeared on a small independent broadcast holding a photograph of a daughter Vought had insisted never existed. A retired scientist confessed on camera and was found dead the next morning, but the footage had already spread. The dam was cracking. Vought responded the only way it knew how. It declared Bill a threat, a foreign entity, a terrorist in armor. The networks they own ran the story on a loop. Pundits debated his motives. Experts questioned his sanity. Polls were commissioned, shaped, and released to show a public turning against him. The 7 were ordered to prepare for engagement. Press conferences were scheduled. War drums, in the language of marketing, began to beat. But something unexpected was happening inside Vought Tower. Heroes who had spent their lives smiling for cameras began to look at one another differently. A young speedster paused in the hallway and asked a question she had never dared ask aloud. A veteran of the 7 sat alone in his quarters, rereading old footage of his own rescues, and could no longer tell which ones had been real. A woman with the power to read minds heard for the first time the quiet hum of doubt running through the entire building. Not all of them would act. Some were too afraid. Some were too compromised. Some had done things that could never be undone. But the certainty was gone. The unquestioning loyalty that Vought had built its empire upon was cracking from within, the way old stone cracks before a long winter. Bill felt it too. He did not celebrate. He knew what came next. He had stood at this moment on 100 worlds. The moment when a corrupt system, sensing its own death, stops pretending to be civilized. The moment when smiles drop. When contracts are torn up. When the true face of the thing is finally shown. The storm was gathering. And Bill, as he always had, walked toward it. The first strike came at dawn. Vought did not announce it. They simply attacked. A squadron of military aircraft, flying under corporate clearance, opened fire on the warehouse where Bill had been sheltering a group of witnesses. The missiles never reached the building. Bill rose to meet them in the gray light of morning, Stormbreaker raised, and the sky above the city split with a sound that woke every child for 50 miles. Lightning answered him. Not the lightning of weather, the lightning of judgment. It coiled around the aircraft like a living thing, sparing the pilots, shredding the weapons, and sending the burning hulls drifting harmlessly toward open water. Then the 7 came. They came in waves, the way Vought had trained them. A train first, a blur of red across the rooftops, hoping to land a strike before Bill could turn. Bill turned. He caught the speedster mid-stride, not with violence, but with a single open palm, the way a man stops a child running too fast in a hallway. A train collapsed against the impact, gasping alive, ashamed. The deep came next, riding a wave summoned from the harbor, and Stormbreaker answered the wave with a gesture, parting it back into the sea. Black Noir descended from a rooftop in silence, and silence met silence, 2 warriors circling, until Bill finally lowered his weapon and let the masked figure strike. The blows landed. They did not move him. Black Noir, breathing hard, stepped back and did not raise his blade again. Bill did not kill. He never killed when he did not have to. This world, he understood, had been taught that strength meant slaughter. He intended to teach it something else. The military arrived. Tanks rolled through the streets. Drones filled the sky. Vought had called in every favor, every contract, every quiet agreement signed over expensive dinners. The city center became a battlefield. Civilians ran. Sirens screamed. News helicopters circled, broadcasting the chaos to a planet that could not look away. And through it all, Bill moved like weather. Stormbreaker tore through tank columns without taking a single life. Lightning grounded itself harmlessly into empty streets, guided by a hand that knew exactly where the people were and where they were not. Buildings he could have leveled, he left standing. Soldiers he could have ended, he disarmed. The damage, where it came to machines, to weapons, to the symbols of the corporation that had turned this world's heroism into a marketplace. The Vought logo, painted on the side of a 40-story tower, cracked under a single strike and fell into the plaza below, where no one happened to be standing, because Bill had quietly emptied the plaza an hour before the battle began. One by one, the heroes of the Seven fell, not in death, in surrender, in exhaustion, in something quieter than either, a kind of recognition. They had spent their lives fighting villains scripted for them by handlers. They had never fought something like this, something that did not hate them, something that pitied them and refused to hate them no matter what they did. Starlight did not fight at all. She landed beside him, her hands open, and asked simply what she could do. Bill looked at her, and for the first time in many days, something close to a smile moved across his face. He told her to protect the people in the shelters. She nodded and went. And then, at last, Homelander entered the sky. He did not come to save Vought. He did not come to save the city. He came because the cameras were watching, and because the world had begun to doubt him, and because somewhere in the hollow place where his heart should have been, a single unbearable thought had taken root, that if he did not destroy the Silver Stranger, he would never again be the brightest light in any room. He struck without warning. His eyes burned. The beams tore across the sky and met Stormbreaker's lightning in midair. The sound was not thunder. It was something older. Two suns refusing to share a horizon. They clashed above the city. Glass shattered for miles. Cars lifted from the streets. Homelander fought like a man who had never lost because he never had. He was stronger than Bill in raw output. He was faster in close quarters. He landed blows that would have killed a lesser warrior. And Bill, bleeding from a cut above his brow, kept rising. And again, and again. Because Bill had learned on 100 worlds that strength was not the loudest thing in a fight. Endurance was. Purpose was. The willingness to take one more blow than the other man was willing to give. Homelander began to falter. Not in power. In will. He had never fought someone who would not break, who would not bargain, who would not, even bleeding, look at him with anything other than that same calm, terrible understanding. And in that understanding, Homelander finally felt what he had spent his entire life avoiding. He felt small. The final blow did not come with thunder. It came with stillness. Homelander hung in the air, breathing hard, suit torn, blood at the corner of his mouth, his cape whipping in a wind that no longer felt like his own. Below them, the city had gone quiet. The fighting had stopped. The cameras, miraculously, were still rolling. Every screen on the planet showed the same image. Two figures in a broken sky, one of them trembling, one of them steady. Bill raced Stormbreaker. The world inhaled, and then he lowered it. He floated toward Homelander, slowly, the way one approaches a wounded animal. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at the man who had built an empire on fear, who had killed without remorse, who had let children burn for ratings and called himself a savior. He looked at him fully the way he had on the rooftop. And then, in a voice quiet enough that only Homelander could hear it, he spoke. He said that he had come a long way to find a world like this. He said that he had seen tyrants ground into dust, and gods cast down from their thrones, and warlords broken by their own pride. He said that any of those endings could be Homelander's easily in the next breath if he wished it. But he would not give him that ending. Because Bill said the worst punishment for a man like him was not death. It was to live. To live in a world that had finally seen him clearly. To live without the love he had stolen, without the fear he had cultivated, without the cameras that had made him real. To live simply as what he had always been beneath the costume. A frightened child in a man's body, alone in a sky that no longer belonged to him. Mercy, Bill said. That was the word Homelander had never understood. And mercy today would be his sentence. Then Bill turned away. Homelander hung there, unmoving as Bill descended. The cameras caught every second. The world saw the most powerful being on Earth left alive by a stranger who could have ended him with a thought. They saw him hover, alone, in the wreckage of his own sky, with no script to follow, no handler to whisper in his ear, no audience left who believed him. It was the moment the Empire ended, not with an explosion, with a refusal. In the days that followed, Vought collapsed faster than anyone had imagined possible. The evidence Bill had gathered, combined with the footage of the battle, broke through every firewall the corporation had built. Senators resigned. Executives were arrested. The 7, what remained of them, scattered, some into custody, some into hiding, some into the slow, painful work of trying to become something better. Starlight stood at the front of it. So did others, quieter heroes who had never been allowed to lead. And across the world, something strange began to happen. People started asking questions they had not asked in a generation. What was a hero? What made one? Was it power? Was it popularity? Was it the suit, the smile, the franchise? Or was it something simpler and harder and older than any of that? Children put away their Homelander dolls, not in anger, in thought. Teachers paused in the middle of lessons and rewrote them. Old footage of forgotten heroes, ordinary people who had run toward fires and never been paid for it, began to circulate again, watched with new eyes. Bill walked among them quietly for a time. He helped where he could. He listened more than he spoke. He did not give speeches. He did not accept honors. When a reporter asked him what he was, he said only that he was a traveler, and that travelers did not stay. And somewhere, in a sealed room in a quiet facility, Homelander sat alone, watching the world remake itself without him, learning, slowly and badly, the first hard lesson of being merely human. The morning Bill prepared to leave was clear and cold. He stood on a hilltop outside the city, Stormbreaker resting in the grass beside him, and watched the sun rise over a world that no longer quite belonged to Vought. Smoke still drifted from places that had burned. Builders had begun already to repair what could be repaired. The rest, the deeper wounds, would take longer. Generations, perhaps. But the work had begun, and that, Bill knew, was always the hardest part. A small crowd had gathered at the base of the hill. Not officials, not cameras, just people. A mother with her daughter, a retired firefighter, a boy who had once owned a Homelander doll and now held nothing in his hands at all. Starlight stood among them, quiet, her cape gone, her uniform replaced with something simpler. She did not speak. She did not need to. Bill turned to them. He lifted Stormbreaker, not in threat, but in greeting. And then he spoke, for the last time, the only words he wished to leave behind. He told them that power by itself meant nothing, that any storm could be powerful, any fire, any falling stone. Power was the cheapest thing in the universe. He told them that strength by itself meant nothing, that cruel men were often strong, that tyrants were often strong, that strength without honor was simply a longer leash on a smaller soul. He told them that a hero was not measured by what they could do. Anyone could do things. The question was always simpler and harder. What did they choose to protect? When no one was watching, when no cameras were rolling, when there was no reward, no contract, no applause. What did they protect then? That, he said, was the only true measure. That was the only thing that had ever mattered. He looked at the boy with empty hands. He looked at the mother. He looked at Starlight and gave her the smallest nod, one warrior to another. Then he rose. Stormbreaker carried him upward, slowly at first, then faster, until the hilltop fell away and the clouds opened above him. The crowd watched until he was only a glint of silver, and then only a memory of light, and then nothing at all except the wide, quiet sky. But on Earth, in the days that followed, something began to spread. Not a religion, not a brand. Told around tables, told in classrooms, told by parents to children at bedtime. A story about a stranger from the stars who had come to a world of false gods and refused to become one. They did not call him a god. They did not build statues. They simply remembered him the way good stories are remembered, as a hero, as the worthy champion who had passed through their sky and left it cleaner than he found it.